The world after nuclear war isn't what you think. 4:16 a.m. The radar bloom ignites over the northern coastline, then multiplies like bacteria in a petri dish. The duty officer blinks hard because the screen looks wrong in a way training never prepares. The room smells like burnt coffee and hot plastic, and the air suddenly feels too thin. Somewhere deep in the building, a siren starts and never finishes its first breath. The first alert reaches the Capitol as a clipped sentence, stripped of emotion by protocol and fear. Phones vibrate on knit stands, and the vibration alone feels like a threat crawling across skin. In apartments, people wake to the same silence because the city has not screamed yet. As the world holds its breath, where are you when the sky stops being trustworthy? In the command bunker, the wall clocks disagree by fractions, and those fractions suddenly matter like blood type. A general points at a map that is already outdated because the missiles are already in flight. The launch corridor is calculated in seconds, and the seconds are calculated in lives. In that instant, the old world doesn't just end. It loses the language to explain itself. The missiles fly low, then high, then higher than weather and birds ever go, and still they remain unseeable. Satellites see them as new stars moving against the black, slow enough to be obscene. Computers tag trajectories, assign probabilities, and print certainty on clean white paper. The paper looks calm, which is how apocalypse often begins. Retaliation is not a choice in the room, it is a timer that is already started. Codes are opened with hands that do not shake, because shaking wastes time. A voice reads confirmation phrases that were designed to prevent mistakes, yet mistakes are already everywhere. The decision is framed as prevention, but it sounds like surrender to physics. Outside the military perimeter, a commuter train slides along its rails with the confidence of routine. People scroll news feeds that do not update because networks cannot carry panic fast enough. The public hears nothing but distant sirens and assumes a chemical fire or a storm. The information gap is not empty. It is filled with whatever fear can invent. In the grid control centers, operators notice SCADA screens stutter like a heartbeat turning irregular. A cyber barrage rides the same moment, because modern war travels on wires too. Substations misread load, breakers trip, and the grid begins shedding cities like a wounded animal drops weight. The lights dim in waves, and the waves teach everyone what dependence feels like. The first detonation is not heard at first, because sound is slow and pride is slower. A flash turns windows into white mirrors, and those mirrors burn eyes before anyone understands why. The shock wave arrives like a hard slap through concrete, then a second slap through lungs. People fall without seeing the hand that hit them. 100 miles away, cameras catch a rising column that looks like a storm deciding to stand upright. The cloud forms its own geometry, too perfect, too vertical, too patient. Newscasters speak faster because speed is mistaken for control. The broadcast cuts mid-sentence, and the blue screen feels more frightening than any image. In the Capitol, emergency channels try to unify a population that still thinks unification is possible. The president appears briefly, lit from below, eyes fixed on a teleprompter, like a life raft. The words are designed to soothe, but the voice is thin because the lungs know truth. The feed drops, and the silence afterward becomes policy. People do not run immediately because denial is the strongest shelter most ever built. They call relatives, and calls fail, and failure becomes the first shared experience of the new era. They refresh social apps that freeze, because servers cannot decide which crisis to serve first. Confusion spreads faster than smoke, and smoke is already moving. Minutes later, the second strike finds the ports, the refineries, the airfields, the places that make a nation breathe. Fireballs punch holes in the horizon, and the horizon answers by turning orange. The smell arrives hours later, carried by wind, a sweet chemical scent that doesn't belong to morning. Birds drop from the sky, not dramatically, just suddenly, like switches turned off. Hospitals feel the surge before ambulances even arrive, because power flickers and generators cough into life. Surgeons keep cutting under emergency lamps, and the lamps make everyone look like ghosts. Intake staff stop asking for insurance, because paperwork is a joke told by a dead world. Every corridor fills with the sound of people learning they are not safe. Then the electromagnetic pulse rides over everything like a silent tidal wave. Cars stall mid-intersection, their dashboards dying in one synchronized blink. Elevators stop between floors, trapping people in metal coffins that still smell like perfume. Radios crackle with static, and the static feels deliberate, as if the air itself refuses to cooperate. ATMs freeze with cash trapped behind plastic and code, turning money into a rumor. Gas pumps lock because they require authorization that no longer arrives. Cell towers overload under desperate hands, then topple into quiet as backup batteries drain. The city becomes a museum of conveniences that can no longer perform. The supermarket shelves empty, not because supply fails first, but because fear does. Shoppers move like predators, quick hands, lowered eyes, carts packed with anything storable. Security guards stop pretending they are referees and start protecting their own families. The first fights are over water because thirst is the earliest truth. Police dispatch systems choke on calls that describe everything and explain nothing. Officers drive until their fuel runs out, then stand in streets that no longer recognize authority. A few still try to maintain order, because identity is hard to abandon. Others remove uniforms because uniforms become targets once rules dissolve. By afternoon, the roads become clogged arteries, and the nation begins suffering a cardiovascular collapse. People flee toward countryside that they imagine as clean and forgiving. The traffic jams become camps, and camps become arguments, and arguments become violence. Nobody knows which direction is safer because the map has changed without telling anyone. The blast zones are not just circles, they are gradients of damage and deception. Buildings look intact from far away, then crumble when touched, because heat has weakened every joint. Streets are littered with glass that shines like ice, and every shard carries a story of pressure. The dead are everywhere, yet the living keep stepping around them like obstacles. Fire crews attempt containment, but water pressure drops as pumping stations lose electricity. Hydrants wheeze like dying animals, offering mist instead of rescue. The smoke columns merge overhead, and daylight becomes a dirty bruise across the sky. People cough and assume it is just smoke, not knowing what else rides inside. The first ash begins to fall like gray snow, soft enough to look harmless. Children reach for it, because children always test the world with hands first. Parents pull them back too late or just in time without knowing which. Fallout does not announce itself. It simply settles where you live. In government shelters, air filtration becomes the new religion, maintained by people who were accountants last week. The doors seal, pressure locks, and the outside is instantly reclassified as hostile terrain. Inside, fluorescent lighting replaces sunrise and schedules replace seasons. The bunker feels orderly, which makes the coming madness harder to recognize. The psychological shift begins with small irritations that never get a chance to fade. Sleep cycles drift without sunlight, and fatigue becomes a permanent accent in every conversation. People whisper about rations, as if rations can hear them and retaliate. In enclosed spaces, resentment recycles faster than air. Above ground, improvised leaders emerge in the first vacuum of certainty. A retired sergeant becomes a mayor because he speaks in verbs and directions. A pharmacist becomes a judge because she controls antibiotics like they are votes. Authority is no longer elected, it is rationed and defended. Clean water becomes the first true border in the new world. A town with a functioning well becomes a sanctuary, then a fortress. Outsiders arrive with hollow cheeks, and every hollow cheek is a question with teeth. Letting them in risks, disease, and theft, turning mercy into a tactical decision. The first epidemics are not exotic. They are ordinary infections now unopposed by supply chains. A cut becomes a sentence, and fever becomes a verdict delivered overnight. People learn to sterilize with fire, alcohol, and prayer in that order. They hoard painkillers because pain becomes constant background noise. Communication fragments into islands of rumor and shortwave murmurs. Someone claims the war is over, and the claim spreads because it is soothing. Someone else claims more missiles are coming, and that claim spreads because it explains dread. Information at this moment is poison disguised as clarity. In the surviving military nodes, protocols continue, even when the nation those protocols serve no longer exists. Officers track radiation plumes on paper maps, marking hot zones with thick red ink. Patrols are sent to assess bridges that might carry refugees or raiders. The chain of command holds, but it holds like a cracked bone. At the edges of cities, gangs form not from ideology but from hunger and opportunity. They strip abandoned cars for batteries, siphon fuel from tanks, and collect firearms like currency. They learn quickly which neighborhoods still have generators because light becomes a beacon. Violence becomes the simplest form of negotiation. Night falls earlier now, not because the sun changes, but because smoke makes darkness heavy. Streets that once glowed with signage are lit by barrel fires and occasional muzzle flashes. The silence between sounds becomes a new kind of terror, because it suggests listening. People speak in whispers, as if volume invites disaster. In rural regions, farmers face a choice that feels like betrayal either way. They can share stores and seed, or they can protect them with fences and rifles. Many try sharing first, until sharing becomes being emptied. Trust collapses the same way a bridge collapses one cracked support at a time. The currency dies quietly, replaced by trade that feels medieval and brutally modern. Batteries for bread, antibiotics for ammunition, fuel for information. People discover which skills are valuable when civilization is stripped to essentials. A mechanic becomes wealthier than a banker ever was. In the first month, the weather becomes an enemy because forecasts vanish with satellites and networks. Storms arrive unannounced, smashing tents and flooding basements used as shelters. Cold nights kill the weak, and the strong learn that strength is not always enough. Firewood becomes strategic material, fought over like oil. Food stores begin to rot without refrigeration, and the smell of rot spreads like accusation. Freezers become coffins for meat that cannot be saved. People dry what they can, salt what they can, smoke what they can. Hunger becomes a calendar, counting days by stomach pain. In the rubble of industrial zones, chemical fires leak toxins into rivers that once served as lifelines. Water turns strange colors, and still people drink because thirst negotiates poorly. Boiling helps, but it does not remove everything that kills. The invisible threats become more numerous than the visible ones. In some regions, small councils form and attempt rule by consensus. They write curfews on cardboard, and cardboard becomes law when backed by rifles. They issue ration tokens that look like monopoly money and function like guilt. Every rule is a gamble because enforcement costs blood. Elsewhere, warlords rise not as caricatures, but as efficient managers of fear. They promise security in exchange for labor, loyalty, and silence. They create checkpoints and demand tribute in food, fuel, or people. The old idea of citizenship dissolves into simple belonging or exile. The prepared survive differently, not just with supplies, but with mental scripts. They already know their water plan, their heat plan, their watch schedule. The unprepared learn in public, making mistakes that attract predators. The gap between them becomes a social fault line that keeps widening. Months pass and the ash settles into soil like a curse that will not wash away. Crops fail in patches, then fail across fields, because seasons no longer behave predictably. Livestock sicken from grazing in contaminated areas, their milk turning into a risk. Hunger becomes political, because whoever controls calories controls movement. In surviving bunkers, maintenance becomes obsession, because one broken seal can end an entire community. Filters are checked like heartbeats, swapped like organs, and argued over like sacred relics. Children grow up under artificial light, learning the sky as a myth told to keep them calm. Time becomes the real enemy, because time erodes every system eventually. Above ground, those who move become a new class of survivor, neither settled nor fully free. They travel with carts, bikes, and patched vehicles, reading landscapes for danger signs. They carry radios powered by solar scraps, listening for voices that might be traps. Their civilization is motion, and motion keeps them alive while keeping them small. The coastlines change as ports burn, and ships become floating refuges. Some survivors gather on cargo vessels, oil platforms, and jury-rigged barges, chasing cleaner air. They fish, desalinate, and cultivate algae in tanks that smell like tide pools and hope. The sea shields them from some fallout, but storms punish every mistake. Navigation becomes guesswork when GPS fades and maps stop matching reality. Without satellites, weather becomes a surprise attack, and piracy returns as survival rather than crime. Engines fail, metal corrodes, and replacement parts become legends. Each voyage becomes a gamble between starvation on land and death at sea. In the high atmosphere and beyond, a thin slice of humanity watches Earth dim under smoke. Orbital crews ration oxygen, recycle water, and pretend the planet below is only temporarily sick. A micrometeoroid strike is now an existential threat because rescue is no longer coming. Space feels cleaner, yet psychologically it is a slower suffocation. Back on the surface, geopolitics does not vanish. It mutates into smaller, meaner forms. Alliances form between settlements, written in handshakes and enforced by shared threats. One community trades grain for medical care, another trades ammunition for fuel. Betrayal becomes common because desperation makes promises lightweight. The second winter after the exchange is the one that breaks the most people. Heating becomes scarce, and shelters become crowded, and crowded shelters breed sickness. People burn furniture, books, even walls, feeding culture into flames for warmth. The cold teaches a brutal lesson. Comfort was always borrowed energy. By year 2, the world's soundtrack changes completely. No traffic hum, no aircraft, no steady industrial roar, only wind through broken structures. Distant gunfire becomes as normal as thunder once was. Dogs howl at night, and the howls travel far in the new quiet. Silence is never empty anymore, it is loaded. Children who are born now do not inherit nostalgia, they inherit rules. Don't touch the dust after rain. Don't drink from moving water. Don't trust strangers with clean clothes, because clean often means stolen. Their games imitate raids and defenses, because that is what they see adults rehearsing. Some communities attempt reconstruction with salvage and stubbornness. They rebuild small grids with scavenged solar panels, wind turbines, and rewired alternators. They run clinics with sterilized tools and strict triage, choosing who gets treated first. Progress returns in inches, and each inch is fought for. But every rebuilding effort faces a weakness that can erase it overnight. One contaminated water source can empty a town faster than any bullock. One fire can consume a storehouse and turn a winter into a mass grave. One rumor can spark a riot, and riots are faster than diplomacy. The world after nuclear war is not one world. It is many worlds stacked on the same ruined planet. Some live underground in structured decay. Some live behind walls in armed routine. Some drift across land, some float at sea, some orbit above as reluctant exiles. Humanity does not end, it fractures into survival species. The final truth arrives slowly, like radiation sickness that starts as fatigue and ends as collapse. Modern life was never steel and glass, it was electricity and trust, held together by invisible agreements. When those agreements burn, people do not become monsters. They become desperate accountants of risk. And the scariest part is how quickly the new logic begins to feel normal. So the aftermath is not just ash and ruins. It is a mirror that shows what civilization actually was. It was refrigerated food, treated water, and the assumption that tomorrow will resemble today. It was the belief that systems will keep working because they always have. Now the planet teaches a different lesson with every silent street. In the end, there is no clean ending, only adaptation and the slow rewriting of what human means. The old flags fade, the old borders blur, and the old comforts become myths for children. Survivors keep moving, keep filtering, keep guarding, keep counting calories and hours. And the haunting realization remains heavy as fallout. The war lasts minutes, but the world it creates lasts inside you forever.